Harriet Morgan had once believed that nothing truly unpredictable happened in Windy Gale. It was a modest town circling a wide gulf off the bay, dotted with pastel houses that gleamed in the sunshine. On idyllic afternoons, locals would walk along the breezy promenade, greeting one another in the friendliest manner possible. Harriet, however, saw the town from an entirely different vantage point. The driver's seat of the aptly named Galishore shuttle. Every day, she would navigate winding roads, picking up residents and tourists alike. She knew the daily routines, when Mr. Barlow needed a lift to the pharmacy, or when Miss Cooper visited her daughter at the retirement community. Harriet prided herself on recognizing faces, though she sometimes struggled to remember names in the moment. Rarer still were the days when she'd pick up a complete stranger. One mellow morning, as Harriet made her usual stop near the orchard on the edge of town, a tall, bookish-looking man climbed aboard. He wore a charcoal grey coat that looked a little too warm for the mild seaside climate. Beneath a navy fisherman's cap, his eyes darted nervously behind thick-rimmed glasses, as though searching for someone or something outside. Harriet offered her usual bright greeting, but the man mumbled only a faint hello and sank into a seat near the back. Ever curious, Harriet made a note of him. Perhaps he was a teacher or a visiting researcher for the local historical society. She couldn't be certain, and Windy Gale prided itself on out-of-towners who visited to study the region's maritime routes. She carried on her route, picking up a mother and her toddler near the post office and taking them to a playground across town. A retired couple hopped on to go to the farmer's market. Still, Harriet cast a sly glance every so often at the quiet stranger, who kept his notebook balanced precariously on his knees. It seemed stuffed with loose pages, scribbled over with small handwriting. Occasionally he flipped through them and frowned, his pen hovering in mid-air as if he were solving some pressing problem. At the final stop, Harriet watched him gather his belongings, slip the pen in his pocket, and hurry off without a backward glance. She contemplated calling after him, but he seemed preoccupied, lost in thought. Taking a quick breath, she checked the seats to ensure no one had left trash behind. Her breath caught when she spotted something tucked between two cushions. The stranger's notebook. Harriet lifted it gingerly, the spine on the verge of bursting with dog-eared pages. The man was nowhere in sight, and Harriet was momentarily stumped on how she could return it. The next scheduled pickup was just minutes away, so she resolved to keep the notebook safe in the meantime. She placed it on her dashboard and headed back out on her route, hoping the man might return to claim his lost item by day's end. The hours passed, as did Harriet's usual line of cheerful travellers, but the stranger did not reappear. By early evening, Harriet parked the shuttle in the transport lot behind the municipal building. She clocked out, then carefully tucked the abandoned notebook under her arm. A twinge of curiosity nagged at her. She told herself she should try to find a clue about the notebook's owner so she could return it. Perhaps she'd glance at the first page, glean some name or contact. After all, it was her duty as a conscientious driver. That night, as Harriet sipped lavender tea in her small but cozy living room, she gently opened the notebook. The first page stuck slightly to the second, and both were lined with the sort of labyrinthine scribbles that made her jaw drop. At the top, a single line of neat handwriting read, "Life is a puzzle, unravel it with care." Below that, the page was divided into short paragraphs, interspersed with bullet points. It wasn't an ordinary list or journal entry, though. The words read like riddles. The first one, Harriet noticed, was boldly underlined. "I speak but have no voice. I can guide you, yet I hold no knowledge of my own. What am I?" Intriguing, Harriet thought, nibbling the tip of a pencil as she flipped another page. She found half a dozen more riddles, each numbered. Some had doodles or symbols in the margins, arrows, small waves, tiny anchors, and cryptic notes like, "Check the old port," or "Tomorrow 3 p.m. Orchard." Harriet's mind buzzed with curiosity. Why would someone carry a notebook stuffed with riddles about objects that speak but have no voice, or riddles about places that change daily with the wind yet remain unmoving at heart? She recognized some references that might connect to Windy Gale's geography, especially the orchard or the shore. Could these be clues for a treasure hunt? Or was the man a teacher, composing riddles for an upcoming puzzle-themed tour? By the time Harriet finished fumbling through the first dozen pages, it was well past midnight. She sighed, exhausted but too stimulated to sleep. She placed the notebook on her nightstand, determined to try again in the morning to find the owner. Yet, as she closed her eyes, the cryptic lines drifted through her thoughts. A whisper of adventure tickled her brain. The next morning, Harriet arrived early at the shuttle. She asked around if anyone knew a man in a charcoal coat who wore thick glasses. There were vague half-answers. Some remembered a man waiting by the orchard, but no one knew his name. Before her first route, Harriet asked Miss Cooper if she had seen the man the day before. Miss Cooper recalled noticing him stepping off near the Historical Society building on Maple Street. Perhaps, Harriet decided, she would pay them a visit when she was off duty. With the notebook tucked into her satchel, Harriet made plans to investigate further. After finishing the day's routes, Harriet strolled into Windy Gale's Historical Society. She was greeted by a stooped gentleman with a kind smile, Mr. Peterson, who was in charge of genealogical records. Harriet tried describing the stranger, but Mr. Peterson merely shook his head with a sympathetic frown. He had been out in the field for most of the previous day researching an old whaling log. Still, he invited Harriet to glance through the guest book. She scanned the small ledger, hoping to catch a matching signature. The scribbled entries identified travelers from various towns, but Harriet didn't see any name that made her think of the stranger with the notebook. On her way out, Harriet paused by a display that showcased old maritime instruments. Something clicked in her memory when she saw a tarnished compass behind the glass. A compass speaks, with its needle directing a person which way to go but without any voice. That matched the first riddle she had read. I speak but have no voice. I can guide you, yet I hold no knowledge of my own. What am I? The answer might be a compass. Harriet's mind soared with excitement. She hurried home, determined to decode each riddle systematically. Maybe the rest would give her hints about who this stranger was and what he was after in Windy Gale. That evening, Harriet settled at her kitchen table. She flipped to the first riddle and wrote her guess, compass, next to it, feeling pleased. The second riddle read, I reflect your story yet remain apart from it. The deeper you delve, the less certain you become of reality. What am I? Harriet shook her head. It sounded like something philosophical, maybe a mirror or water or even a dream. The next page showed a doodle of wavy lines next to an anchor. Water? Could it be the sea? She then recalled the clarity and distortions of looking into the ocean. One could see a reflection but also see beneath the surface. Harriet hypothesized the sea as the second answer. The riddles continued to reference items intimately connected with Windy Gale's coastal identity. Lighthouses, tide schedules. Oh, it struck Harriet like a sudden gust. These riddles might be describing a puzzle trail around Windy Gale, culminating in a final discovery. She noticed cryptic schedule notes. Orchard, 3 p.m., Lighthouse, dawn, Marina, 6:15. Harriet suspected the mystery man had been following them in chronological order, perhaps doing a self-guided riddle tour. Or was he searching for a specific artifact? Days passed, and Harriet found herself increasingly gripped by this puzzle. She jotted down every potential answer, devoting her breaks between shuttle routes to scanning the notebook scrolls. She learned that some riddles referred to local landmarks she knew well, such as the stately oak behind the old library, or the weather vane perched atop the bed and breakfast. It was as though the notebook invited its reader to visit each location in sequence and gather a hidden piece of a larger story. Meanwhile, the man never returned to Harriet's shuttle. She carried the notebook with her every day, sometimes flipping to a fresh page to see if it held a phone number or even a clue about who the man was. Often, she found half-finished riddles and sketches of panoramic views. The strangest part was a short list of names that appeared on an otherwise blank page. Captain A. Fitch, Georgia Wilcox, Morgan Hill, 1887. Harriet recognized Morgan Hill as part of the original settlement near the orchard. Captain Fitch was a local legend, rumored to have buried a small trove of valuables near the shore. So many local myths circulated about lost treasure that Harriet rarely paid them serious attention, but now she felt as though she stood on the precipice of an uncharted discovery. One afternoon, Harriet parked the shuttle for lunch at a small cafe near the orchard. Curious about that orchard clue scribbled in the notebook, she decided to take her sandwich to go and wander among the trees. The orchard smelled sweet, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. She admired the orchard's caretaker, Guillermo, who was tending to an apple sapling. She asked if he had seen the tall stranger in the charcoal coat recently. Guillermo scratched his beard. "I did see a fellow who was scribbling in a notebook a few days back," he said. "Seemed to be measuring the distance between the orchard's oldest tree and the fence. I asked what he was up to, and he just shrugged. Said he was working on local research. That was the extent of Guillermo's involvement." Once Guillermo went back to the sapling, Harriet ventured to the orchard's oldest tree, an ancient apple tree with a gnarly trunk. Slowly she circled it, searching for anything out of the ordinary. Beneath some tangled roots she glimpsed a small slip of paper, weighed down by a stone. Excitement fluttered through her as she crouched to pick it up. It bore a short riddle that Harriet recognized from the notebook. "I was here once more. The orchard never sleeps. When the gulls cry thrice, you shall see what you seek." She realized the man must have left it as a clue to himself, or for someone else. But now Harriet was the one discovering it. Her pulse quickened. Did this mean she was on the right track? Harriet sighed, folding the note carefully into her pocket. She wanted to do right by the stranger, returning his notebook and completing whatever puzzle he'd begun. Part of her suspected that unraveling these riddles might lead her to him. She thought back to the cryptic schedule referencing the marina 6:15. That might be a time to catch someone at sunrise or sunset. Harriet wasn't entirely sure, but she guessed 6:15 in the evening might coincide with the departure of the last fishing boat. She decided then and there she would be at the marina at 6:15 that very day. As the sun began to sink, Harriet finished her final route and headed for the marina. The fishy air and chorus of seagulls greeted her. She strolled along the docks, scanning for a tall man in a charcoal coat. Boaters were tidying their vessels, fishermen were cleaning the day's catch. No sign of the stranger. At 6:15 sharp, a final boat pulled into dock, and Harriet's anticipation fizzled when a couple of tourists disembarked, shaking out their jackets. With a disappointed sigh, Harriet walked further down the pier. A tattered notice pinned to a post caught her eye. "Grand reopening of the old lighthouse. Guided tours and historical presentations starting next week, 9 a.m. sharp." It reminded her that one of the riddles in the notebook had pointed to a lighthouse. "At the edge of land, I watch the sea, guiding travelers safely home. My light may glow, but my secrets remain unknown." Harriet guessed the man might be planning to attend that reopening event to resolve some puzzle. Maybe that was her best chance to find him. Over the next few days, Harriet felt time slow to a crawl. She would occasionally solve another riddle from the notebook, scribbling the solution in the margins. Bits of local lore turned into puzzle pieces in her mind. She juggled her job, her discreet questioning around town, and her attempts to crack the final pages, which contained large question marks and references to Morgan's treasure. She wondered if Morgan referred to her own ancestors. She was, after all, a Morgan. The story around Captain Fitch often included a mention of a hidden chest. The notion that Harriet might be stumbling upon her own heritage startled and thrilled her. Finally, the day came for the lighthouse reopening. Harriet arrived just before 9, I.M.ing, the notebook safely in her satchel. Townsfolk were clustered around the entrance, greeting the mayor and a few local dignitaries who gave short speeches about preserving Windy Gale's maritime history. Harriet scanned the group, and her heart lurched when she spotted him. Tall, with that charcoal coat, minus the fisherman's cap. He was standing off to the side, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the newly painted lighthouse door. Without hesitation, Harriet threaded through the crowd, calling, "Excuse me, sir." He turned sharply, eyes wide behind the thick-rimmed glasses. "You left this on my shuttle," Harriet said, revealing the notebook. His face lit up with relief and alarm. "Oh, my goodness," he breathed. "I've been searching everywhere for that. I'm so sorry. I meant to come find you, but I got sidetracked." He reached for the notebook, but Harriet hesitated, a protective hand over it. She explained how she had tried to track him down, how she discovered the orchard note, how she'd been deciphering the riddles. The man gave a weak chuckle. "Ha, I see. I've caused quite a stir. My name is Stephen Fitch. I'm a graduate researcher looking into my ancestor, Captain Amos Fitch. I found some cryptic references in old family documents, and I came here hoping to unravel them." He frowned. "Although I guess I found more intrigue than I bargained for." Harriet's heart fluttered at the mention of Captain Fitch. She extended her hand. "Harriet Morgan," she introduced herself, and saw a flash of recognition in his eyes. "Morgan, as in Morgan Hill?" he asked. Harriet nodded. She explained that the town was founded by her great-great-grandfather. "We might be tangled in the same family story," Stephen said quietly. "My notes suggest that Captain Amos Fitch and Morgan Hill were once partners in a maritime business that eventually fell apart. There's a story that they hid something, a trunk or chest, maybe with coins or old documents, and parted ways. One riddle pointed me from the orchard to the marina to this newly renovated lighthouse. I was about to check inside for any clues." He smiled sheepishly. "Thank you for keeping my notebook safe." Harriet and Stephen joined one of the first guided tours, ascending the spiral staircase. The guide recounted the lighthouse's storied past, from storms to near shipwrecks, emphasizing its thick walls and hidden rooms that were once used for storage. Harriet felt her pulse race with each step. If the riddles indeed pointed to the lighthouse, perhaps there was an unrevealed nook or cranny they needed to find. She and Stephen hung back, letting the group move ahead, while they inspected every detail of the newly painted walls. Eventually, Harriet noticed a narrow panel near the base of the lamp room. It seemed older than the rest. At her touch, it gave slightly. Stephen remembered a riddle that read, "The guiding light stands tall, but below the brilliance a secret calls. Slip behind the walls to find your truth." He gently pushed on the panel, and it swung open to reveal a shallow recess. Harriet gasped. Inside lay a small metal box covered in rust. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out, the old lock so corroded that a firm twist broke it. Together they eased open the lid. Inside were faded documents, a few tarnished coins, and the scrap of a handwritten letter. Harriet picked up the letter. It was dated 1887, signed jointly by Amos Fitch and Morgan Hill, referencing profits from a final cargo run. The letter read, "Should we pass from this life, we hope that whoever finds this keeps our memory and the spirit of enterprise alive. We parted as friends, not enemies, though rumor cast doubt upon our alliance. This chest stands as proof that brotherhood can withstand time and gossip. May the future know we were partners in hope." Harriet felt her eyes mist with emotion. Here, hidden away, was a piece of living history that contradicted the old rumor that Fitch and Hill had parted on bitter terms. Stephen reverently picked up a coin. "I can't believe it," he murmured. "We've actually found it." Harriet carefully replaced the coin, glancing up at him with a beaming grin. Together they closed the box, uncertain what to do next. Should they donate this to the Historical Society? Or keep it in a museum dedicated to both families? They agreed that the find belonged to Windy Gale and its heritage, so they would take it to Mr. Peterson at the Historical Society to ensure it would be preserved and displayed for the public. At the base of the lighthouse, Harriet and Stephen lingered, the weight of discovery making it hard to part ways. Between them, the battered box seemed to glow with a gentle significance. "I'm sorry for the trouble," Stephen said softly. "I never meant for someone else to get tangled in my search." Harriet shook her head with a smile. "I'm glad I got tangled," she replied. "It's been an amazing journey, and it brought to light this wonderful piece of history." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you be staying in Windy Gale for a while?" Stephen shrugged with a hopeful grin. "At least until the Historical Society can process and examine these documents. And, well, maybe a bit longer if you'd like to help me interpret them." Harriet found her cheeks warming. "I'd be delighted." They left the lighthouse with the rest of the town crowd, each left brimming with a sense of expanded possibility. It wasn't every day that centuries-old secrets found resolution, bridging family stories once separated by rumor. The mayor, having caught wind of their excitement, asked them what had transpired, but Harriet offered a cryptic smile for the time being. She knew that revealing the discovery in a thoughtful way would be best for the town. Just outside the lighthouse, they ran into Mr. Peterson, who eyed the rusted box with awe. Harriet and Stephen explained in hushed voices, hoping to preserve the solemnity of the moment. Mr. Peterson's eyes glistened as he realized part of Windy Gale's seafaring past was about to become more complete. That evening, Harriet found herself once more in her little living room, the remnants of the day swirling through her mind. The orchard, the marina, and the lighthouse had each revealed their puzzle piece. Equally unforgettable was the abandoned notebook that had sparked the entire adventure. Her gaze fell on the notebook, now returned to Stephen but lingering in her memory. Harriet recounted how she had pored over each riddle, travelling the roads of Windy Gale with new awareness of the secrets beneath everyday surfaces. It occurred to her that the man's scribbles had actually led them to a story of unity and shared heritage. The partnership between her ancestor Morgan Hill and Stephen's ancestor Amos Fitch, once overshadowed by local gossip, now shone brighter than the myths of petty feuds. In discovering the real truth, Harriet had found not just an artifact, but also a new friend in Stephen. The next day, Harriet resumed her shuttle route with her usual diligence, but she viewed her town through fresh eyes. For the first time, the roads of Windy Gale no longer felt so predictable. Her bus's interior might once again host a passenger carrying a mysterious object or secret. Even the orchard, historically just a place to drop off visitors, seemed laden with the possibility of hidden notes or unwritten stories. When her shift ended, Harriet made her way to the Historical Society to meet Stephen. She found him bent over a table strewn with the newly found documents from the chest. He waved her over excitedly, showing her the letter, which they now read in full. It detailed a final maritime venture, a letter of friendship, and a vow to safeguard the union between their families. Harriet felt a surge of pride. Generations later, an unexpected twist of fate and a misplaced notebook had allowed Harriet and Stephen to bring this piece of family history into the open. She helped him carefully photograph each page, the quiet hum of the Historical Society's overhead lights enveloping them in a cozy sense of scholarly purpose. In the days that followed, Harriet and Stephen presented the box and its contents to the mayor and a small panel of local experts, who promptly decided to incorporate it into a special exhibit on Windy Gale's founding families. The orchard caretaker, Guillemot, dropped by to hear the story. Town gossip spread quickly, and soon Harriet found herself modestly credited in a front-page article in the local paper. Driver's discovery unlocks town mystery. The warmth of the town's appreciation washed over her like a sunbeam after a storm. Perhaps the greatest surprise for Harriet, though, was how she and Stephen fell into an easy rapport. They continued to meet outdoors, exploring the orchard, the coastline, even rummaging through the old storage rooms of the Historical Society, hungry for more clues. As summer slowly gave way to crisp autumn breezes, Harriet realized just how grateful she was that the stranger had stepped onto her shuttle that fateful morning. The riddle-laden notebook had led not only to an unexpected historical find, but also to a rare connection and understanding between two families who were, in some manner of speaking, always intertwined. On her last day off before the new exhibit was unveiled, Harriet accompanied Stephen down the winding roads out of the orchard, approaching the orchard's grandest tree for a final symbolic gesture. They carefully suspended a handwritten note in a small glass jar from an old branch. Inside, they'd written a short dedication to their ancestors, Fitch and Hill, for the adventurous, curious souls who might one day stumble upon it. To those who wander and wonder, it began, may you continue to piece together the puzzles of our shared past. Harriet felt a flutter of peace. She had come full circle. From that single glance at a scribbled riddle in an abandoned notebook to a new chapter in Windy Gale's evolving history. When they returned to Harriet's little house, the shadows were growing long and the familiar hush of evening drifted in. As they stepped onto her porch, Stephen said quietly, I never imagined I'd uncover old coins and letters, but I truly never imagined I'd find a friend who cared enough to solve those puzzles with me. Harriet laughed softly and met his gaze. Windy Gale does that to people, she said. It welcomes you in ways you don't see coming. They stood there for a moment, listening to the wind whisper through the alleyways behind Harriet's home, carrying the promise of more stories and hidden curiosities. Finally, as twilight settled in earnest, Harriet turned the key in her door, her mind lingering on all that had happened since the day she found a tattered notebook between two shuttle seats. She realized that, although the treasure chest was a momentous discovery, the real treasure was bringing the past and present together, families, communities, and the spark of possibility that arises when a puzzle beckons to be solved. Life could be just as it always was in Windy Gale. Orchard visits, coastal breezes, friendly waves from neighbors. But Harriet knew now, in her bones, that a small town's calm surface could hide secrets as vast as the sea's depths. It took a puzzle, a bit of determination, and a shared curiosity to reveal them. And she wondered, as she closed her door against the night, what other mysteries might blow in on the next morning tide, or perhaps walk through the door of her shuttle, holding the faint shimmer of another riddle waiting to be unraveled.